Hello, and welcome to week 12 of the course. This week we are covering editing. Behind me you see an editor screen. This is a digital editing system which we'll be covering. You see all the various shots and the shots that he's working on and how they're placed in a line for digital editing to create the movies that we have come to love. So let's get into it. I'm going to share my screen and we'll watch a PowerPoint. All right, all right. Editing. Okay. Very great field in filmmaking. One of my favorite roles. Okay, so editors. Let's go to week 12. Final unit in the course is what we're on. We're covering editing, sound, and producing. Starting today with editing, sound next week. It's culminating in quiz 4 and case study 4, where you have a choice from 2 films. We're covering pages 41 through 45. Okay, open the booklet while you watch the lecture, as always. Complete the homework on editing, and that will include how Star Wars was saved in the edit. You're really going to like that one. That's a great little film about how Star Wars was completely changed and saved by its editor, rearranging scenes and making the film make a lot more sense. Okay, editing. So it's often said that a movie is written 3 times. First, when the screenwriter commits the story to paper. Second, when the directors and actors commit the story to film. And third, when the editor constructs the story in time through editing. You see, I have that demonstrated here. We go from development right into production, and pre-production's in the middle. Don't forget that one. And then here in post-production, we have the editing, this being what an editor's screen looks like with all the various shots. Okay, so this is an important thing to think about. So editing can save or ruin a film. In fact, Kubrick said all filmmaking is gathering footage to edit. Editing is where movies are made or broken. Many a film has been saved and many a film has been ruined. So the editor puts the shots together as they come in from the set. Films tend not to be shot in order in which the story unfolds, so editors will be working on scenes out of order. Over many months, they edit shots into scenes, then they arrange scenes into a movie. Then they go back and refine even more. So first they just sort of lay it all out. Then once they've got the whole film, maybe at that point it's 2 hours long, then they trim it down to say maybe 1 hour and 40 minutes, making tiny little adjustments along the way. They primarily work alone. They do have a staff. Let's get into them. First, an assistant editor and other assistants. Basically, they take care of the paperwork aspect. They interface with the production. They talk to the cinematographer. Hey, some of these scenes are a little dark. What can we do? That type thing. They're primarily doing the busy work, a lot of the writing, so that the editor can focus solely on editing. Okay. So what's an editor good at? Storytelling, visual awareness, have a good eye, know what fits the style of the film, being able to pull off the tone and the themes of the film through the editing. Obviously software mastery, communication, be able to talk to the director before and after the production, figuring out what they want and delivering on that. Lastly, attention to detail, be patient, show attention to detail and good organizational skills, often under pressure. So classic Hollywood style editing gives the illusion of continuous space and time. What happens on screen makes as much sense as possible. It doesn't call attention to itself. So we're talking about the movies that you guys have seen. Now, there are exceptions, of course, but this applies to most Hollywood films, or at least parts of all films. So it doesn't call attention to itself. The editing is made to be invisible. Unlike color and lighting and cinematography, which will sometimes do something dramatic to call attention to itself, generally editing doesn't. And when it does it very purposefully in a film. So edits are there to move the story forward. Cuts are psychologically motivated from the audience point of view. So editing, as a film is shot, it is edited. They start immediately. So as soon as the shots are done and the director's happy with what they've captured on film or on digital, they immediately start. So sound and picture are synchronized, matching up the sound and the picture. Now, you might say, why? Well, don't forget, sound and picture are recorded separately. We're filming the image through the camera, and then we have recording equipment, which we'll cover in sound, that records the sound. So the first thing has to happen, they have to be synced. They have to be brought together. The best takes are chosen based on performance. Often multiple takes are cut up and used together. So there might be like half of this take is good, but the second half isn't. So they might use one shot from the first half of that take and use this second half of another take. Shots are assembled to make up scenes. Scenes are assembled to make a movie. So let's get right into the basics here of different edits that we'll see in a film. So first off, we have the cut, the standard edit for film, simplest transition from shot to shot. I'll put a couple GIFs in here to basically illustrate how that works. Obviously, the films, this is one of the entire, this didn't repeat continuously in the film. These are just examples of a cut. So here we see this character looking at this other character, cut back. We understand the relationship. They are eyeballing each other. This is a cut from the barbershop. Average movie has over 1,000 cuts in it. I think around 1,300 is average. Cuts are carefully placed. Editors trim seconds off of shots to get the timing right, so that the moment when we go from one character looking to another character looking, that's got to be perfect. Okay, then we have the dissolve. Here you have a couple of examples. This one from Psycho, this one from Inherent Device. And dissolve is a gradual transition between two shots. It can show the passage of time. It visually links the two shots, so we understand that maybe he's talking about this woman, or there's some sort of connection, as we see here in this shot. It can demonstrate a symbolic connection, as we see here in this shot from Psycho, as this woman dies. It can also show an end to a section of the movie. Very often films will, sections of the movie will end with a dissolve. Here we see fades. We see examples of fade. This one from Psycho. It's a gradual transition to black, or from black into a shot. So in this example from Psycho, as she's falling asleep, it fades to black. Then it's the next morning, and it fades up from black to the shot. Okay, it can be used to show the start of a new scene, and it can mean the end of the film. Obviously, sometimes when the film ends, we have a fade out. All right, and this is used also in television. This is pretty typical standard tropes for editing. Next, we have wipes. Now, we don't see a lot of wipes. I'll just throw these up quick. Here's a couple from Star Wars. George Lucas brought back the wipe. We don't see a ton of these. Here's another one from Sherlock Holmes. Here's a few other edits, okay? So we have a smash cut here in this first example from The Big Lebowski. Okay, so this guy goes and punches him in the head. Bam, we cut to fireworks. Now, that wouldn't make sense, except you understand that he's being knocked out, and presumably he saw stars, as the expression goes. Fade to white in Black Swan, pretty simple. By cutting, the editor places two shots in conversation with each other. The edit has to make sense and continue the logical flow of action, or disrupt that flow purposefully. There are many ways to place shots together and create meaning. We saw that here, two different shots. It doesn't make sense, this fireworks shot, but it does when you consider that he's being knocked out. In this example from Psycho, we have a couple things. We have a double exposure. Okay, we have a skull, right there it is, boom, over top of the guy, into a dissolve where the car where his murder victim is buried is being pulled out. So that's where we were combining a variety of different editing techniques to make a narrative statement. So another big important thing that we see in filmmaking, or in editing rather, is cuts on action. Okay, in this example from Matrix that you're looking at, the editor cuts on screen action of Neo opening his coat. Now, when Neo moves, our eyes detect motion. So that's where you put the edit, and it makes it more seamless. We don't notice it as much. That's the objective here, to make it, to not be jarring. All of a sudden we're looking at something different, but it makes sense because he starts to move, boom, we make the cut, and we reveal the jacket. So editors cut on action, motion on screen helps hide the edit. Okay, this is called match on action, or cutting on action. So here's another example. This guy is running, and we cut, boom, and when we cut there, he's coming out at the same time. It makes total sense. It doesn't look like we lost any time. Action in shot one must match the starting action in shot two to make the edit work. Editors trim single frames just to get it right. So here's an example of just what we're talking about. The editor must perfectly match up shots and they must have been filmed properly with the cuts in mind. And many films will have an editor right on set to kind of check that sort of thing to make sure that it's going to cut together, so to speak. So here's a cuts on action with a wipe. So here we're combining things. We've got a wipe edit, which we've just learned, and we've got this action on screen. When the first character flips the gun, boom, we cut to the second character in a different location looking at the gun. Okay, so the cut on action, wipe of action. Editors can place shots together in creative ways to create new meanings and connections. Here we see the motion on screen leading to the wipe edit. Okay, so this is combining editing vocabulary. Editors can do that. They have all these different tools that I'm going to teach you here in a moment, and they combine them together to create the films that we watch. Each time they might make up something new. They might go to a classic time-honored trope, but it's how they use the vocabulary of editing that makes the edit. So editing, how does editing tell the story? Let's look at a few specific examples of that. So first off, we have leading the performance, or letting the performance lead the edit. So in The Joker, it's a pretty powerful performance by Joaquin Phoenix. The edit needed to follow this performance to progress over time. The editor approached with extreme care to truly reflect Arthur Fleck's transformation. So this is an example of the editor letting the performance lead the edit. Like, we want to show this now and show this later to let his performance grow the character. Another big issue in telling the story is pacing. The pace is determined by the length of the scenes, how fast the action moves, and how quickly the viewer is provided with information. This is all created in the edit. Okay, so here you see examples of the editor screen in digital editing. The editor creates the pace of a film with the timing of the edits and the length of the shots. So if he shortens the shots, that picks up the pace. If he stretches out the length of the shots, uses long takes, that slows down the pacing. It's more than simply the number of cuts or the time between them. Pacing is something practical as well as something intangible that informs audiences how to view a film and keep up with the story on the screen. Okay, so different films have different rhythms, different pacing. Sometimes within a single film, you'll have fast pacing and another part slow pacing. So editors can slow down a moment in the edit. So here we have, I believe this is from The Natural, which we looked at earlier. So we have a cheering crowd, hands gripping on the back, kind of a tight shot here, medium, close up on the pitcher, and then boom, the ball in the air. So you can stretch out and elongate a moment. If this is about to be the final pitch of the ninth inning, then you want to give that moment a lot of pressure, so you stretch it out. They can also shorten time. So sometimes if you want to really hold in a moment, you do something called staying in the master. Rather than moving into a close-up, you just leave the shot wide, because what you're looking at is so beautiful, as we see in the shots from Roma, that you can stay in the master, and that kind of stretches out the moment. Okay, so those are two examples of stretching out the moment. Okay, editors can also speed up a moment in the edit. So here we see Bruce Lee and also Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who appeared in this film, Game of Death. And, you know, fight scenes in particular can be stretched out, shortened. The way that it's edited is really important. They can speed up the action in a fight with more quick cuts, accelerating the pace. Also hiding if there was a mistake between the stuntmen. Maybe someone got actually hit or the punch doesn't really land, but you could hide that in the edit. Okay, so here we're going to look at a couple different clips today, so be ready for that. What I want you to do, this is a great film called City of God, and this is just the opening sequence of the film. So we'll watch a little bit of this, and this is an example of rhythmic editing, increasing the pace. Here we go. I'm going to fast forward a little bit. This is a film from Brazil. It takes place in Sao Paulo. Or no, actually it takes place in Rio, excuse me. And it's about the poverty-stricken ghettos of Brazil. So notice how the editing is all rhythmic. It's to the music. We've got all these different scenes going on. We don't totally know what's going on. Let's cut back to it. And it's also giving us the flavor of Brazil. I've been to Brazil, and this film really captures it very well. Okay, we'll stop there and move on. But great film if you get a chance to see it. Okay, pacing. Pacing can emphasize a moment by slowing down and showing multiple shots of a process. This works really well for training montages and to demonstrate the character struggle. So the classic training montage of all time here is Rocky. So, we could have a quick thing. I could show him running and then show him at his destination. That's easy. But if we stretch out the scenes, it really makes his training very hard, okay? By the editor leaning into scenes of him running, showing multiple versions of it, it emphasizes the moment, it stretches it out, okay? It makes it important. So editors can emphasize a moment by stretching out the scene and showing more of the process. Another great example of this is anytime you have to defuse a bomb. Very often they'll stretch it out, show you lots of details, thereby leading intensity and making the moment more important, more precious, more dangerous. Slow motion. Great example. I have a couple of slow motion GIFs here for you to look at. This is a famous scene from Thelma and Louise as they ride off the edge of the Grand Canyon. Of course, they go to slow motion to emphasize the moment, okay? Slow motion shots are filmed and then slowed down by the editor, okay? The actual slow motion part is done all in editing. It's great for action to emphasize a moment, or this, we have a character here, looks like they're falling to their death. And I'm not sure what film this is in. So we want to stretch this moment out, and slow motion is great for that. So let's take a look. We're going to put it all together, talking about pacing and how something is edited. We're going to put it all together in this next clip. This is from Raging Bull, 1980. It's going to show us how an editor can use rhythm and pacing to really create magic in a film. Now watch what the director does here. He slows things down, changes the lighting. And then speeds up, shows the fury of the power. Okay, so we slowed things down and then speeded them up. Okay, rhythm. Pacing is created from rhythm, and the rhythm in the film is created by the editor. Editors will often edit scenes in a rhythm and then change it up to match the story shift. Okay, so here we see some rhythmic editing. Sometimes they'll edit to music, or sometimes they'll make a scene. Every cut will be maybe 10 seconds or 30 seconds. Okay, so they'll create a consistent rhythm in the editing, and the audience subtly, subconsciously picks up on this. So rhythm editing ensures a pace and flow of the film that keeps the audience interested and excited, often offering a pattern that generates a clear pacing from moment to moment throughout the story. So sometimes you might set up a rhythm of editing, putting a cut every, say, 30 seconds, and then you break it and you put 10 seconds, or you stretch a moment out. So this is what editors are doing. So rhythm and editing, some of you recognize this clip from Baby Driver, Edgar Wright. Baby Driver is an action movie that is edited to popular music. The cuts are on the beat to the driving music, the driving music, giving the film a rhythm. Okay, except maybe in dialogue scenes. Anytime there's action, this film really does it musically. It's sort of this type of editing is perfectly suited. This is a comedy action. It's a little bit lighthearted, including the violence. So having it edited to music totally works. It makes it more fun, gets the audience into it, gets you pumped up. So cutting rhythm, editors can lengthen shots to slow the tempo of a film, or they can shorten shots to accelerate the tempo. So slower editing builds tension, allows the audience to study the performance. Slower editing is really good when you want to be sad or lean into an intense emotional moment. Faster editing heightens excitement. It heightens attention. It stimulates the viewer's eye. So that's really good for action scenes or maybe a fight where you want the viewer to feel the rhythm and the violence of the fight. Okay, so think of rhythm as a beat at which a film progresses, determined by the number and duration of the shots used. So as you can see, as we just various types of genres here, when we get to action, which tends to have a lot of editing in it, you have the highest number of shots, okay? Right, because that means they're cutting a lot. More shots, more cuts. So action and sci-fi adventure, which are films that try to be visually stimulating, all these genres, fantasy as well, are going to have more shots and more edits. Here's a little tip though. Tension is created by not editing. I just want to remind us of this. We just watched Birdman. I guess, yeah, you guys have just watched Birdman. And so cuts release tension, okay? Sometimes you want to let the shots breathe and build so the viewer can savor the moment. We really saw that in Birdman, where there were almost no edits in the film. And when they were arguing, the camera switching back and forth between these two, it's really tense. They don't cut. So in other words, they keep that tension in the viewer. So let's just cover the basic editing sequence here. Now, I did make a mistake here in the booklet. I noticed that we jumped ahead to page 44. I didn't have this part in the booklet in the correct spot. So my mistake, but I'm just pointing it out now. Establishing shot, master shot, medium shots, close-ups, back to the master shot. So notice how we're going from wider, sort of like more information, to more specific information, going wider to a close-up, and then back to the master, okay? So here's how it looks. Here's how the shooting diagram would work. Maybe the wide shot is where we do our master. We shoot our medium shots and our close-ups from these positions. Let's look at a specific example from a film. So here we have the exterior shot, our establishing shot that lets the audience know where the action's taking place. Then we have the master shot. We're in, okay? And very often they're going to shoot the entire scene from this master shot. They'll do at least a few takes of the whole scene from the master, so they can come back to it whenever they want. So here's what it looks like. The master shot's a wider shot, probably further back than this, capturing all the action. Then we move into medium shots. As the narrative and the scene develops, we want to punch the camera in a little bit and reveal a little bit more information, get a little more personal. So here we do these two conversing. And then eventually we'll go to close-ups, okay? Maybe for the penultimate moment in the scene or some sort of emotional reveal, we want to do that in the close-up so that the actor's face can be revealed, okay? And then to go back, we go back to the master shot. So look, they don't have their menus. It's at the end of the scene. Looks like everybody's mad at each other. Something has happened in the scene. We go back to the master to reinforce it. Now remember, they're going to be shooting the whole scene from various angles, but the editor puts it together in the edit. He decides where the scene opens and where it closes. So the other thing that's really important in Hollywood editing is called continuity, okay? Continuity is editing is what you're used to. That's what most Hollywood films are made of. And continuity editing is the predominant style of film editing and narrative films. The purpose of continuity editing is to connect all the separate shots in the editing process, establishing a logical coherence between shots. Now, in this example, we're going to look at this clip in a second. This is from Psycho. The woman wakes up in the morning, having slept the night in her car. Police officer comes up. There she is sleeping. He looks in. She answers his question. He asks for a license. He looks at it. Eventually, she drives off. You know, without even seeing the movie, these shots all kind of make sense. This is continuity editing. It all flows together. Continuity is the principle of making sure that all the details in a film are consistent from shot to shot and from scene to scene, okay? So if he has sunglasses in this shot, he's got to have the sunglasses in this shot unless we see him take them off. If a scene upholds the standards of continuity, each shot feels as though it seamlessly flows from the previous shot and reinforcing the sense of realism. So it's really about realism. It's really about being invisible and not sort of throwing the audience off. So let's take a look at this clip and you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay. Cutting on action of him moving. She realizes what's happening. Then they cut to her POV.
In quite a hurry.
Yes, I didn't intend to sleep so long. I almost had an accident last night from sleepiness, so I decided to pull over.
You slept here all night?
Yes. As I said, I couldn't keep my eyes open.
There are plenty of motels in this area.
Okay, so what we can see in the editing there is cutting back and forth between them in their conversation, but the edits make sense. When she stops speaking, we see his reaction to what she said. So this is continuity editing. It doesn't throw us off. It seems like the realistic flow of time. It seems like we're there, okay? So just to give you an example of non-continuity editing, here's a series of shots from a Russian film which didn't have continuity editing. They're sort of juxtaposing images here together, and you have to sort of figure the images and the meaning out from the various films put together, various shots put together. So just wanted to show that as an example of an alternative to continuity editing. Most films we see are continuity errors, and almost all films will have continuity errors. So most Hollywood films use continuity. Okay, this is what is typical for any narrative film, and also films from Europe all over the world. Almost all films have continuity editing, and almost all films make mistakes. So a couple ones, here we go. This looks like one of the grips, or someone who's not in character was actually ended up in a shot. Here we see continuity errors from The Shining. He was eating a sandwich, and so someone didn't pay close attention. In this shot, he's got more of it eaten, and in this shot later in the film, there's more sandwich. So that's a problem. Here's a really obvious one. Look at the belt on Lando Calrissian. Okay, someone just wasn't paying attention. Now this is all part of the continuities team to catch this, but these things happen all the time. They're called continuity errors or mistakes or goofs, and you'll see them listed in IMDb if you like that sort of thing. So let's get further into continuity editing. So a couple of things: linear narratives. We've talked about that previously in the class. Events proceed in chronological order. Also the 180-degree rule, which we've talked about previously when we discussed cinematography. So two characters in the same scene should always have the same left-right relationship to each other, okay? So the audience never gets confused. So basically, you don't flip the camera from being on one side of the conversation to the other. Eyeline match. The characters' eye lines must appear to match. We're going to get into match cutting. And of course, we'll talk about over-the-shoulder shots. So let's get to some examples. So here we go, linear narrative and over-the-shoulder shots. We've talked about these throughout the class. This is a Hollywood convention. When two people are talking, they will often do it over the shoulder, as we see in these three examples. And this way you get both characters in the shot, but it still looks good within the rectangular frame. And you wouldn't want to shoot it from perpendicular, then you'd be looking at the side of people's faces. That doesn't work. And of course, we have a linear narrative, which is similar to the way that the film is edited in a linear fashion, with individual scenes and dialogue being stacked on top of each other, next to each other. 180-degree rule, once again, just simply states that once you place the camera here on this side of this imaginary line, you can put it anywhere here in the green. You can put it anywhere on this side, okay? Because you'll always have the same relationship of the orange to the blue character. But the moment you go over into the red and you flip, now the blue and the orange character have flipped in your shot. It doesn't work. It's confusing to the audience, okay? Now, all rules in film can be broken. And here we see the master Stanley Kubrick from The Shining does this. Now, in this scene, this character is insane, and he's going insane, and he's hallucinating this entire thing. So it makes sense to have the camera placed here and then flip it around, have the camera placed here. It's confusing a little bit to the audience, but that makes sense in the scenes. So eyeline match, okay, this is a very important, especially important in animation, that animated characters are eyes line up with the real people that we're filming. So this is also true in regular film. So here we have a simple over the shoulder shot going back and forth between them, but it's really key that their eye lines match, that these actors are looking at each other. That's very, very key. And we see this all throughout film. If it's off, you realize something doesn't look right, even if you don't notice it. So here we are putting everything together. We have the master shot. We have close-up 1, close-up 2. I replicated the way this would be shot. We'd probably shoot this whole scene from all 3 positions, and then the editor will figure it out in the edit as to what order we cut back and forth from master to close-up. Okay. So the point here, what we're talking about is seamless editing. Hollywood editing style is said to be seamless or invisible to the audience. We don't want them to notice it. Okay. It usually doesn't call attention to itself. It's designed to keep the viewer in the world of the movie, right? You know, when you get into a movie and you're completely caught up and you forget about everything. And then when it ends, it's almost like you're waking from a dream. That's a good movie. That's a well-edited movie. And editors spend a lot of time hiding edits to make the viewing experience as smooth as possible. So some seamless editing techniques, which we've already talked about, cutting on action, rhythm and pacing. But now we'll get into match cuts and visual cuts. Just show you a few examples of that. So here's from Grease. Here's a little GIF on this. So we have a match cut where you go from the car that they dream about to the car that they have. Okay, so a match cut of one scene to another, basically in the same position, works really well. This is a little quick video on visual matches, slightly different. An editor and even a filmmaker will try to film in such a way so that you can transition to shots, and where the attention was in the previous shot becomes the attention in the second shot. So look at this first example.
The match cut, technically used in film to connect 2 seemingly separate scenes so that you, the viewer, knows that they are deeply connected in some way, consciously or subconsciously. Inspired by some of these Hollywood examples, I try to...
Okay, so there's a bunch of different examples of visual match cuts. So the one shot visually matches the other and they cut together really well, or the attention is in the same place in both shots. Okay, so now let's look at a graphic match. So very similar, another version of a match cut. This is from 2001. You have a bone in a spaceship, and he uses this edit to compress thousands, hundreds of thousands of years of history, going from early human days, almost pre-evolution, to us conquering space. So let's take a look at that edit. This is from 2001, Stanley Kubrick. So the apes have mastered one tool, and the humans have mastered others. Okay, he's drawing the analogy between the spaceship and the bone being tools that we use to conquer our environment. Okay, so editor as storyteller. Let's get into some examples of that. All right, first up, we have the montage. This is really important. I believe I left this out of your booklet, which is a mistake. So make sure that you write this down and remember this one thing, because this will be on the quiz. Quiz, potential question. Editing technique in which a series of shots are edited together over music showing the passage of time. Okay, you've seen montages in lots of different movies. If you've seen Team America, they make fun of the montage. Montages are great for training sequences like we see here with Rocky. They're great for dating, showing the couple going on dates, falling in love. In montages, there's no dialogue. It's often over music. It shows the passage of a time or the development of a relationship or the development of improving skills. And so we see lots of these. And let me show you another example of the montage. This is from Requiem for a Dream. And this is a great example of a montage, cutting before between different actors and their various drug problems. So we have a mother and a son. The mother is addicted to chocolate and television. The son is addicted to drugs. No dialogue. We're just showing the passage of time, showing them how they spend their life, all the various drugs they do, their habits. And seeing it this way, seeing it repeated like this, really shows the position that they're in. We don't want to spend all the time to show all the way they spend their life, but a montage compresses time, shows us their habits over maybe many, many months, and gives us a sense of where their life is going. Okay, another example here, the parallel edit, okay? This is when you have two different scenes going on simultaneously. Star Wars loves to do this. And you edit back and forth between the two scenes. This character's in peril, this character's in peril. Now, the example we're going to look at for this is from The Godfather. This is one of the best examples. Now, parallel editing, sometimes called cross-cutting, is the technique of alternating two or more scenes that often happen simultaneously, but in different locations. So you're showing something going on over here and you're cutting it with something happening somewhere else. So the best example of this is The Godfather. So let's watch. Here we go.
Richie, do you renounce Satan? All his works.
So I think we get the idea here. Where Michael, the Godfather, is at his baby's christening in the Catholic Church, and while this is going on simultaneously, all over town, his henchmen are taking out all their enemies. So the contrast of him renouncing Satan in the church and so forth, and then all the violence that's taking place in his name is fantastic, and it really works well for parallel editing. Okay. And so what parallel editing is doing is it's juxtaposing, putting two things together, okay? So I just wanted to have a word about that, juxtaposition, okay? So when you put shots together, they automatically create a relationship and we think something. So here's an example. Here's Alfred Hitchcock. We show a shot of this family and him smiling, sweet Alfred. Here's Alfred Hitchcock. We saw a young, beautiful woman, him smiling, we might think he's a pervert. So the combination of shots next to each other when they are juxtaposed together gives us ideas. Another example here we have is you show a shot of a character thinking, then you show a shot of a battlefield. Is he thinking about his days as a soldier? These three shots, you see an asteroid, the monument being destroyed, people running. These things are all in different locations, but as I place them here, when we see them in the film, we understand that they're related, that this asteroid is causing this destruction. Okay, so juxtaposition, placing shots in relationship to each other to create meaning. So here we see an example of POV editing. This one's from Spider-Man. Editor cuts between character and the character POV. Okay, so we're showing the character, and then we're showing what the character is looking at. The edit shows the character's madness being triggered. Okay, in POV editing, the editor creates a connection between the character and what is being looked at. The character's reaction can inform more than the dialogue. Those of you know the story of this film, he's going crazy. And so that's conveyed in the editing. Editing is storytelling, just as in the montage or in parallel editing, the editing actually creates the meaning and tells the story. Okay, just to go back here a little bit, we're going to look at historic film editing. Early film editors held film strips up to the light. It was entirely linear. Later on, something called the Moviola was developed. I actually learned to edit on one of these machines. A work print was made from the negative, and then of course they cut the negative. So very complex, very difficult to do. Here's an example of the Moviola working. You're actually working with a film strip. You're cutting. You're using this thing called a splicer, and you're putting a piece of tape between two pieces of film. It was that primitive, okay? But that's all gone. So eventually they began transferring film to digital, and this is basically the process of taking film and putting it into the digital format. And now pretty much most films are shot on digital. Those that are shot on film are transferred into editing today. And the most popular system is the Avid system. So here's what it looks like. Yeah, this is the workstation. So you have the shot and you can play the shot. The red line represents your cursor. It's like where you are in the movie. And here are all the various shots that this editor has in his movie. And he can move them around, place them over top of each other and dissolve between them. He has a complete palette in which to work. So to get a little bit more specific, here we see the sound effects. You can tell by the sound waves that you see here in the image. Here's where the actual cut is, okay? But in the shot is right here. You can also see dialogue here. Here's our presenter speaking, all right? So he can actually even affect the dialogue and so forth there. This is how it works. The individual frames get moved around on the screen, and the film is built in this way, dropping in various sections, editing them, trimming them, putting them next to each other, and creating the transition that we know as editing. In this example, a shot of the keyboard is inserted between two other shots. This is very easily done in digital editing. Editors will arrange shots in order to make sense and tell the story best. So maybe he's got this one shot here. He wants to go to this shot, but these two shots don't cut well together. We put an insert shot, a detail shot of his hand actually touching the keyboard. Now these two shots work totally together. Digital editing allows you to totally manipulate the image you just as you would in Photoshop. Okay, so it's not just that you are really married to what's been shot. I mean, you can't change what's on the screen, but you can zoom in, you can change the speed, you can even change the direction. You can't do that if there's dialogue, but if there's no dialogue in a scene, characters are running from left to right, and you want them to run from right to left, you can do that. Color correct, sharpness, contrast, bright, all this stuff can be adjusted digitally by the editor. Here's the Avid editing system. This is the Premiere one. And most editors work alone and usually in dark rooms, as you can see from the images. Now, this brings us to a discussion of the life of the movie, okay? Sometimes films are test screened before an audience. Let's say we finish the film. Sometimes alternative endings are created and test screened. Not often, but that does happen. Sometimes an alternative edit is made for foreign markets, particularly China, which will have more restrictions about what can be shown in their country. But because there's such a huge market, those changes will be made. Sometimes a director's cut is made by the director if they're dissatisfied with the studio edit. So we'll talk more about that. Sometimes an edit is made for broadcast TV, particularly if they want to take out any of the extreme violence or nudity. Sometimes an extended cut is made from deleted footage if the film is successful and has a fan following. So these are all sometimes. You usually only get an extended cut if there's significant material left out, as there was, say, in Lord of the Rings. So they had a 3-hour cut and they had a 4-hour cut. Okay, so usually that's only if the film's done well and you want to sell it to fans. So here's an example of alternative ending. I don't know if you've seen Terminator 2 from 1991, one of the best Terminator movies. So theatrical ending, after the T-800 is loaded into molten steel, it cuts to a dark road, which we see here, voiceover from Sarah Connor discussing an unknown future. But they actually shot, which you see here, an alternative ending in which Sarah Connor has survived. It's later, it's 2027, and her son, John Connor, now has a daughter, and he's a senator, okay? So kind of a happy ending. But they decided to go with the ambiguous ending because the choice gives them, number one, it lets the audience decide what's going to happen. It's ambiguous, it's mysterious, it's better that way. But it also let the door open to Terminator 3, the sequel. So real quickly, there's really we're going to talk about what happens in post-production, just sort of summarize that process. there's not a lot that goes on in pre-production for the editor. He's going to have creative meetings with the director. It could be just one. If they've worked together before, they'll just have a meeting and discuss what needs to be done, and that's it. During production, the editing team will begin syncing picture and sound as the shots become available. So those can be done not by the editor necessarily. Sometimes you'll have the assistants do the syncing, because that's a very simple task relatively. And then they'll begin picking takes, and the editor will begin working right away while the film is being made. But really, the real work is done in post-production, okay? And these are the various phases that a film goes through. So we have something called the assembly edit. Shots are assembled, the best takes are selected. And then eventually we work our way to a rough cut. Scenes are constructed, the order is established. Special effects are added as they're completed. Sometimes that doesn't happen until all the rest of the film is edited. Eventually we get to what's called a fine cut. This is where the editing is tightened up, the flow is considered, small frames are trimmed. Eventually we get to something called picture lock. Okay, this is when the picture editing is finished. After that, all that's left to do really is sound. So I put the sound in a different color. We'll cover that next week. I'm not going to talk about that now. And then eventually you'll have color grading, matching all the colors in the scenes. We talked about that during the lighting lesson. Titles and credits, mastering and finishing. And what you end up with is what's called the final cut, which is the finished film, okay? And all this, by the way, is on page 44. So if you're following along the book, make sure you're checking for those numbers. Now in the fine cut, going back a little bit, the editor really gets precise. Single frames are trimmed or added to improve the timing of the edits and to be as efficient as possible. The overall length of the film has to be considered. And at times, trimming scenes will help that. So let's say you have a scene that's 5 minutes long. What if you could get it down to 4 minutes and 30 seconds? Just eliminating a little bit of dead time. That will help in the overall length of the film. And the editors will watch the films repeatedly to get the rhythm and the length just right. Is this scene, are we shortening this scene too much? Should we open it up? And they'll watch the film over and over and over to also make sure the scenes flow well together. A well-edited film has a good flow and a good rhythm. So a couple things about finishing the film. It takes an average of 6 to 12 months to go from raw footage to final cut, okay? So they'll start, editing before the film's finished, but even after they've done shooting, you've still got multiple months of work to finish the film. This phase also includes the addition of any CGI or special effects, motion graphics, title sequences, color correction, so on and so forth, all happening. Titles and credits, printing of them is made. Very often, titles and credits are farmed out to another post-production house. That's not done by the editor, that's handled by the producer. And very often they handle a specific house that'll do the credits for them the way they want them, okay? That's usually not done in-house. So this leads us to a discussion of final cut. Final cut is a couple things. The final cut of the film is the final version of the film, okay? That's the one that goes to the theaters. But also, it's the right to have the last say in the film, okay? Not all directors have final cut, all right? Only directors of high stature or commercial appeal get final cut. So I'm thinking like Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino, Jordan Peele, Martin Scorsese, Kubrick, some of the masters from the past. But otherwise, the people who put up the money own the film and they have final say. So let's say you deliver a final cut of 2.5 hours and they wanted a 2-hour film. They say, hey man, we're gonna have to cut some of this out of here. And if the director refuses, they'll take the film away from him and cut it themselves, okay? And sometimes that director's cut will be released at a later date, not often. But in the end, the producers have final say. The director delivers a cut, and then the producers go to work, very often trying to trim the film. More often than not, they're looking to shorten the film. So here we've seen runtimes in movies. As you see from the 1910s, the runtime's been getting longer, slowly creeping up. We've kind of settled in here at around 120, 127 minutes. Here's a little more detailed breakdown. 140 minutes is the average movie time. This is through 2015. I don't have the most recent data. But most films, as you can see, fall between 120, around 100 minutes which is an hour and 40-minute runtime. That's where most films seem to fall. And as you can see, as they get further out, they it gets less and less. And there's lots of reasons for that. Okay, so let's consider film length. A director delivers his final cut. The studio may recut or trim the film length, okay, if he's not willing or able to do it. Film length is generally agreed upon prior between the director and the producers, okay? Anything over 2 hours has to be approved, okay? There's a few reasons. Long films mean that you're going to have less time to show movies at the movie theater. If you've got a 3-hour movie, you can show 2 showings a night. You do one at 7 and then another one at 10, and people are getting out at 1 a.m. That's a problem. Okay, so long movies are problems for the theaters. They better be blockbusters. Additionally, the audience may reject it. Some audiences don't like long films. Generally, something between an hour and a half and 2 hours is going to be the most successful and the most safe. No one will complain about a 2-hour film being too long, but after that, it gets dodgy. So sometimes this leads to a director's cut. Often a film is taken away from a director. The producers finish the edit with the editor, usually making the film shorter or more commercially viable. When this happens, the director may choose to make their own cut of the film. Sometimes these are commercially successful with hardcore films. And the 2 most famous examples are Blade Runner, which famously the director's cut is much better than the studio cut. That he understood the film much better than the studio, and Zack Snyder's Justice League, which is recently finally released to the public. So we're kind of wrapping up here. So I just want to get in a few final editing terms that I didn't cover. Okay, so the jump cut is an abrupt, jarring edit that breaks continuity. I'll show you an example. Flashbacks, I think you guys know what that is, memories of the past. The cutaway, split screen, and then invisible editing, which we saw used quite a bit in Birdman. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples here. We have a couple from Back to the Future and Saving Private Ryan. So the jump cut. So the best way to explain it is just to show you. The jump cut is when you have an abrupt cut that seems to break continuity. Hollywood used to not have any jump cuts. That would have been the worst mistake you can make. Now they're incorporated in to tell the story. Now let's look how this director did it in this film.
Dr. Yeh thinks I'm beautiful and interesting. Dr. Yeh thinks I'm beautiful and interesting. Are you seeing anyone? You look thin. There's a doctor here that's crazy about me. Are you seeing any? This people too close. I just want.
So this is a breakup message between a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and she's has mental problems. She has a bipolar disorder, and we can see that by using the jump cut, by having her replies jump around, he really expressed her emotional state. So this is a great use of the jump cut. Okay, it wouldn't make sense in a normal film, but in this context, it works really well to express her emotional state. Flashbacks, I think we know what those are. But real quickly, here's a classic example from Casablanca, where Humphrey Bogart, the main character, is thinking about his good old days. The film dissolves. Dissolves into the next shot of Paris, where he was in love with one of the characters what we just met. Okay, so this is a classic flashback, and usually dissolves and these are used to sort of take us back into the past and the good old day memories of a character. Cutaway is a shot that helps tell the story. In this sequence, the shot of the clock is our cutaway. It saves the editor by sitting nicely between 2 shots that don't cut well together. So we have a shot of her sitting, a shot of her standing impatiently. We can't put those together, otherwise we have a jump cut. But we put the cutaway in between, or the insert shot here, showing her getting impatient, waiting for seeing time pass. And then the shots make sense. And then here, a cutaway shot is anything away from the main action. So the main action is the doctor and Bud in Back to the Future, and then they cut away to show what that they're looking at, the spinning license plate. Split screen is when you have 2 different images on the same screen, used really well in Kill Bill and used brilliantly in 500 Days of Summer, where he shows his expectations was to end up with Summer, but in reality, he was alone. So great use of the split screen. Invisible edits I wanted to bring up because we saw so many of them in Birdman. So the film was not all one edit. It was shot in a way to make it look like it was one shot. Excuse me, not one edit, one shot. The film was not all one shot. There are actually edits there. Some are obvious, but some are hidden. And one of the ways they hide them is by hiding them in black. Now, this is a shot from Rope, a famous Hitchcock film. The camera goes into the back of this actor, and then they shoot another shot coming out from the back of the actor. And this is a way that they can kind of hide an edit. Anytime they get to place an edit, it gives a break for the actors and so forth. So this is an example of hiding the edit. Anytime the camera moves into darkness, or if you have a whip pan, in other words, the camera moves really fast and the action gets blurred, you can put an edit there. You can cut to another shot that also has those same qualities, that starts in darkness. So you end in darkness, start another shot in darkness, or hide it in a whip pan. Lastly, stock footage. They don't have to shoot everything. You don't have to go out to space and get a shot of the Earth. We have footage of this. You can go to a library and buy it. So final thoughts. The average film has 1,300 cuts. Every cut affects flow, rhythm, and story. Every cut can make or break the film. 1,300 pieces to an invisible puzzle with endless combinations, none of them right or wrong. That's the beauty of filmmaking. Okay, so here's our review. We talked about some basic edits, cuts, wipes, fades, dissolves. We talked about the editing sequence, establishing master, medium, close-up. This stuff would all be really good for your quiz. We talked about linear editing versus digital editing, how much better digital editing today is, and everyone works in digital. It really revolutionized the industry and probably made films a lot more interesting by being able to experiment in the editing a lot easier. Pacing and rhythm, mentioning things like slow motion and cutting rate. We talked about continuity. That's very important. Parts of continuity includes 180-degree rule, eyeline match, match cut. Continuity equals being seamless equals being invisible. When we storytelling, with editing, we're talking about parallel editing, POV editing, montage. All those are ways that we can actually tell the story with the editing, not with dialogue or what's written in the script, but having the editing tell the story. We talked about the post-production process, finishing the film, and then a few terms at the end. And make sure you watch How Star Wars Was Saved in the Edit. Really great little 20-minute clip that explains that. And also I have another bonus one, cuts in Stranger Things. There's 28 creative cuts in Stranger Things. So I hope you enjoyed the class today. Reach out with any questions, and we'll talk to you soon. See you next week in sound.